guess you're going to want to post the link
I'm coming in now.
over the place. Over the place.
Okay, I think we're live. Hello everyone, welcome to the show. Not that there's anyone there yet, but hopefully there will be in a minute. Tonight's show is about, okay, I think we're live. Oh, I'm getting hello everyone, welcome. Yeah, tonight's show is about the logic of arguments, and in particular dealing with logical fallacies, which everyone seems to suffer from, particularly at Speaker's Corner. So what I wanted to talk a little bit about, first of all I should say I've got Ross with me and Sym. Hello you guys.
Hello.
Evening.
What we want to talk about is the nature of argument, but we probably ought to define what we mean by these things before we begin. One of the problems you have with a lot of arguments is that people sort of like to win and debate rather than sort of come to discuss or learn.
Yeah.
And that sort of sets the whole thing off, and that makes it problematic. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of these fallacies are committed, because they are trying to win an argument rather than actually trying to listen to what the problem is and trying to sort of drill down into the truth of it.
Agreed.
They've already established up front what the truth is, and the net has made it worse because you've got this prevalence for these debates between particular individuals. You know, you get the kind of clickbait headlines, don't you? Jordan Peterson smashes Sam Harris type nonsense. You know, people are looking for winners rather than truth.
Yeah.
So I thought what we would do is first of all talk about what is logic. We should talk about what is logic. That's a good start point. Logic originally just meant words, not much else, but it's now come to mean reason. And reason is really just about how we make sense of things, how we work through problems to get to truth. Normally when we talk about arguments, we usually think of sort of people shouting at each other. But in logic, an argument is defined specifically in a certain way. It's a set of premises and a conclusion, and the premises are intended to determine the truth of the conclusion. So you get if this, this, and this, then this. That's basically the nature of an argument.
Right. Yeah. Like logical syllogisms. Yeah.
Yeah. So for an argument to be what we call solid or sound, it must be valid, and all its premises must be true. If not, then the argument is not solid or unsound. In other words, it's bullshit, basically. A premise, by the way, is a statement that justifies a conclusion. That's the definition of a premise. So the statements, the conclusion, and the premises are true if they are true in all interpretations. So that's another thing that you get with a lot, particularly with like religious arguments. You'll get interpretation being an issue.
The classical structure is all men are mortal. Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal.
Yeah, so there you've got a couple of premises, and then you've got a conclusion. They're all statements. The first two are premises. That's the classic thing: is two or more premises leading to a conclusion. An argument is said to be valid if it is not possible for the premises to be true, and at the same time the conclusion to be false. Right. So that's that's really important. Okay. So you don't want a situation where all the premises are true and the conclusion is false. That would be an invalid argument. An argument can be valid, but all the premises could be false, right? Any or all of the premises could be false. So long as, you know, when they're all true, the conclusion is true. That's the important thing. So an example is like all white people are tall. James is white, therefore James is tall. That's a valid argument, but the premise, you know, one of the premises is false. Yeah.
Premise one is flawed.
Yeah. Well, or that I've got pinky skin, whichever way you want to take it.
Well, yeah, sure.
So there's actually three sort of types of argument. We should probably just talk about that first before we drill into the sort of fallacies, is what we want to talk about tonight. You've got deductive arguments. So that's where we analyze the words and meanings, the semantics, and we draw conclusions. And we don't need to check outside the argument. So it's purely analytical. So it's, you know, we're looking at the actual definitions of words, you know, like, for example, you know, Ross is a bachelor, and then we can draw conclusions from that. So we're just looking at the meanings
Sure.
of words. We don't need to go outside. And formal logic and mathematics are disciplines that are deductive in nature, right?
So 1 and 1 equals 2, or green is a colour.
Yeah, exactly that. Then you've got inductive arguments. Now, inductive arguments are where it requires us to go out and find the truth of the premises, right? So we might have to look at examples to see if we can find sort of generic truths. The results tend to be probabilistic, and they're not absolute, and that causes problems in arguments because people are often looking for absolute. Like when you get evolutionary arguments, people believe that they should be absolute, but in fact they are not. They're probabilistic.
Yeah.
So with inductive arguments, instead of saying the premises are true, we say they are likely or probable. Yeah, I mean that's basically it. But people often demand absolute proof or absolute truth, and outside of mathematics, that isn't going to be forthcoming, right? So
no, it's very difficult to absolutely prove anything.
So this is when we get like people saying, "I've got a fact check." That's what we're doing there. We're looking for the truth of those premises in order to deduce the conclusion. Yeah. So let's look at some of the what this concept of fallacies that we encounter in argument.
Right. Yeah.
Just thinking
all the time.
Yeah,
all
exactly, all the time. We've got different types of sort of classifications, and we're really only interested in formal fallacies, right? Because formal fallacies are like non sequitur is what it is, basically a formal fallacy. It's like where it doesn't follow effectively. So the logic, the formal logic is not correct, it's not structured correctly. But we don't really have to deal with those because they're your deductive arguments, and those arguments we can just handle by looking at the definitions of the words, whereas inductive arguments lead to informal fallacies, and they're more what we see every day at like Speaker's Corner, for example.
Yeah. I think we're probably likely to commit them ourselves from time to time as well.
I'm sure constantly.
I definitely do.
Yeah, we all do. When we get into them, we'll all be laughing at each other, I'm sure, and saying, "Oh, we do this."
Slippery slope and all that.
So they're classified, basically.
My favourite.
Fallacies tend to be classified in lots of different ways, and they're all it's not particularly relevant to what we're talking about today, but a lot of the fallacies, they are grouped into particular things. I think some of the philosophers grouped in particular ways. I think Aristotle grouped them a certain way, and I can't remember what it is, something to do with material and verbal or something like that, material and semantics, something like that. But the grouping that I think is probably most useful is relevance, ambiguity, and presumption, and they can generally be grouped into those, and they more or less fall in the same categories. So with all of that said, I think we should just sort of pile into them and each take turns and bring them forth, and let's have a discussion about them, really. So who wants to start? Where do you want to start?
I mean, should we go through this list?
Yeah, go for it.
I dropped a link. I mean, the first obvious one. I mean, is it worth touching on the straw man? I mean, that's pretty self-explanatory, but if we want to do all that sort of stuff, well,
go for the whole lot.
I mean, we still see it all the time, so it's probably worth covering.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, I'm sure everyone knows, but for those who don't, it's the misrepresentation of your opponent's position, basically, to suit your own ends, to better represent your side, if you will. You see it a lot. I mean,
or usually inflated or sometimes completely off point arguments that I mean, it's essentially trying to undermine your opponent's argument to make it easier to beat by sort of inflating it and make it into
you sort of exaggerate, and then it makes them sort of sound a bit ridiculous, even though that's not the position they're actually attempting to justify.
Yeah, we probably should say at this point that often false arguments, fallacious arguments, are actually winning arguments. That's the problem. And persuasion is a big factor in argument. So a lot of people deliberately use false arguments to win, and their followers will think that they've won, but in actual fact, if you analyse their arguments, they've actually lost. So
Yeah.
that's worth pointing
You
out.
see it similarly. I'll just touch on this really quickly. It's not a fallacy, but you see similar sort of behaviours when as one debater is very often cutting off in a bid to sort of prevent them from actually making their argument.
Mhm.
And then I've actually seen this. I believe it was Christian Prince, if I'm not mistaken, doing it a few times. And obviously, what ends up happening is by the end of the discussion, it looks as the person who interrupted made points and the other person didn't. Therefore, they lose. Whereas in reality, obviously, that's a completely unfair assumption to make.
Apparently, Dennis is letting me know that our volumes are a little bit out. I'm not sure how we adjust that easily, but apparently I'm low and you're spot on, and Ross is much louder. It doesn't help that I've got a rotten cold.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can tweak your audio output on through the Discord's client.
Right.
If yours is already on 100% no, then it might be a bit of a.
Yeah, Ross's is quite high. I'm sure I'll change mine. That'll put nice blobs all over the screen. Yeah,
I'll just sit further back.
Dennis is just saying reduce your volume a bit, but I don't think it's the master volume. I think it's probably me. Dennis, am I okay at the moment? It's going to take him a little while to respond, isn't it? Because they're a little bit behind.
Yeah, it's probably a 30-second or so delay
I think
on
it's
the.
About 10 seconds delay. Pete just raised a point: to avoid straw man, only attempt to argue against someone's position as soon as you can represent it to their satisfaction.
Well, that's pretty much the idea behind steel manning, right? Is you give the most charitable interpretation of their position, and then you attempt to basically rebut that. And obviously, the added benefit of that is not only do you sort of treat your opponent or whatever as you should, but it comes with the added benefit of if you do then make a good enough argument against it, they really have no excuse at that point.
Yeah, you've defeated their strongest point rather than.
So it's a way of really cementing your, I don't want to say victory, but like at least in the eyes of the people who are consuming the debate.
Yeah, I think that's a really good thing. What Pete said, that's right. When your opponent is accepting of your argument, that would be very fair. But we don't fight fair. Most things, like we said, they like to win, and they come away thinking they have won, and of course that doesn't help anybody. It doesn't help them or their followers, or indeed the people.
Another thing I like. Oh, sorry, I was just going to say another thing I like to see along those lines is, especially if it's pre-arranged, a debate, the exchanging of notes between both people participating.
Yeah,
because again, obviously, at that point, it's a lot harder to misrepresent, right? When you've actually studied their position yourself.
Yeah, I've mentioned what you said to a few people, and I've seen the look of horror on their face at the idea that they've got to present their arguments. I've said this to probably about a dozen people so far, because I got it from you, and I think it's a really good way of having a proper debate.
People like to have their gotcha moments, don't they? They like to spring a surprise on you mid-debate and try and throw you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's another thing, right? Like the answer, I don't know. It doesn't follow from that you've lost. It's just that you, but in the court of public opinion,
being honest enough to say I don't know is pretty admirable. But agreed. It's not well received.
I mean, people might feel.
Go ahead, sir.
No, sorry. I was going to say people might feel as if this sort of thing is irrelevant in a way. It's they're having an argument about religion or they're having an argument about philosophy. They might think it's irrelevant, but what we've got to understand is that this is used in politics to persuade people, and they use fallacious arguments in politics, and people actually vote based on these false arguments all the time.
Yeah,
massively affects people's lives. So it's not some sort of abstract concept. We're being manipulated all the time by the media, by companies, by politicians, and they're using these fallacies as part of that process. So we looked at
Agreed.
straw man there. What would we like to tackle next?
Let's have a look. I mean, we did mention slippery slope briefly earlier. That's another really common one that I. Well, I'd say this is where it gets a bit weird for me actually, because I do use the slippery slope a lot. But I don't necessarily think there's a problem with doing it. It's all a case of probability, I think. Like if you're saying allowing A leads to B, I don't think necessarily that's an unreasonable argument
But
if
you
we
have to
accept that
demonstrate, don't you, that it would
probability.
lead to
Yeah,
B. You know, the
but that's what I'm saying.
emphasis.
Yeah, the probability has to be in your favor. Yeah, you can't simply say
Sure.
like, well, it might happen. But
I mean, it's how you use it. If you say something along the lines of A leads to B, leads to C, leads to D, and you can stop at any one of those stages, then it's you're sort of edging into the fallacy region. Whereas if it's just a logical step, like A could lead to B, then I don't think that's an unreasonable statement at all.
yeah, it's a bit more like I don't know, if someone arguing against gay marriage says like, and next they'll want to marry their pets or some shit like that. Like
Well, I've
obviously
done
stuff
it. I
that
mean,
doesn't
I've
necessarily
certainly done
follow.
this. I've done this in argument, and I mean, I would argue, I would hold to it, but it is definitely a slippery slope concept, which is where you say, if we accept transsexual or transgenderism, then it will lead to trans species. That's an argument, and I think, you know, like Colin at the corner, for example, would argue that, Speaker's Corner, he would argue that these things are connected, but we would have to demonstrate the connection, right? We couldn't just make it
Agreed.
as a premise for concluding that we must ban transgenderism because this will result. But I'm certainly guilty of that.
Yeah. Yes, it's a really easy one to just sort of. I was going to say slip into using, but that just sounds like I'm trying to make a really shitty pun. But genuinely, I do find it really easy to sort of deploy that whenever I'm in a conversation. It just kind of comes naturally. Definitely something to work on.
Yeah, Dennis was just saying there, it's only a fallacy if it's false, though, right?
Yeah, false or without adequate supporting evidence.
But the problem is we're trying to ascertain the truth, right? So we don't know it's false or true, and our premises must be true in order for it to be true. So, you know, that's the sort of the premise is that there's a slippery slope, and that isn't sufficient. That's the fallacy, right?
Sure. I don't think it's unreasonable to make a logical step. Like there is a chance that this could be one of the possible outcomes. But if I turn around and say that if you get a credit card, you will end up overdrawn and you will end up in debt, and therefore you will end up bankrupt and homeless and destitute and living in a cardboard box, like I'm definitely committing the slippery slope fallacy. Whereas acknowledging there is a risk of getting myself into financial trouble by taking out a credit card is not a slippery slope fallacy. I think there is a difference, but, and I can tell one from the other. But it's a bit like the beard fallacy or the continuum fallacy. Where is that crossover point? Where does one become the other?
Let's sort of formalize this a bit. I'm going to try and group it because I've got a nice link here that shows us some groupings of these fallacies. So one of the classics we haven't used or talked about is ad hominem, and that comes up a lot.
Sure. Yeah.
Especially at the corner.
Probably one of the most common.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're in the middle of an argument and you put down your opponent in some way. You attack the man, not the argument.
Yeah.
And it's important to differentiate between obvious ad hominem and very subtle ad hominem.
Yeah.
And some ad hominem is actually valid as well when it becomes relevant to the argument itself. So if the argument is about the person. But a lot of the argument that we see, for example, in religious argument, we see a lot of the ad hominem. You're religious, you would say that, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Type premise, which is completely false.
Yeah, I mean, ad hominems can vary wildly. If I called you stupid during an argument, rather than addressing what you were saying, or dismissed you because I think you're an imbecile, like that would be attacking you rather than attacking the argument that you were making. To me, that's an ad hominem. Whereas, or if I were to call you low IQ or something along these lines to try and undermine your position without actually addressing what you're saying.
I mean, and also you could be of low IQ, you could be mentally ill, and you could still be right on your argument. So this is why it's a fallacy. It doesn't indicate anything about the truth of what you're saying. You could be, the crazy man spitting pearls of wisdom. But you get a lot of subtle ad hominem as well, don't you? You get things like "you don't understand," which, if said enough, convinces the audience that they actually don't understand. So that's that sort of persuasion.
Yeah, those are the ones that really do it, right? Like if you're just hurling insults, that's not the thing that wins the crowd, but it's the almost subliminal messaging that you're above the person you're debating.
Yeah.
It's very common for people to do it. And you see it in even the great debaters as well. I mean, some of the people that are loved for their debating, like Christopher Hitchens, the late, great Christopher Hitchens, he did this constantly to put down his mark. And they all do it. George Galloway does it. I've seen George Galloway. I've listened to George Galloway arguing with Tommy Robinson, of all people. And this is going way back in the day when Robinson wasn't that well known. And Galloway just puts him down. He'll bring in, all sorts of things about his character in order to suggest that his argument is invalid.
Yeah, rather than addressing his concerns or the argument that he's making.
The BBC do it, right? So when they have Robinson on, they'll say...
alt-right.
Yeah, they'll call him alt-right. They'll say, for example, you said this before. So again, it's about you. So he's making a statement about what he believes in. And they're saying, yeah, but you made this statement at an EDL rally. So again, it's about the man, attacking the man and not attacking the argument. So it's not just, they use it against people, even people we disagree with. They use these arguments against them. And, and that's one of the worst things. You've got someone who people distrust, but they might be saying something true. And you use ad hominem and it just ruins their argument.
Yeah, it doesn't matter who is making the argument. It matters what the argument is.
I think it's probably the easiest fallacy to spot.
Yeah.
I mean, you do yourself a disservice when you use it as well, because for all intents and purposes, you could use an ad hom, still in the eyes of the people technically, or in the eyes of most people at least, win the debate. But in the eyes of some people, because you committed the fallacy itself, they might completely disregard what you've said.
Yeah, you're undermining your own position, aren't you, by resorting to dirty tactics? Or at least to me, you are.
Yeah, and some people who probably view the debate online or whatever just completely disregard your points at that moment.
I must say that if I hear people making red herrings or basically any sort of logical fallacies in an argument, my ears prick up and I start to pay attention and notice more and more the style of arguing that they're using, and it puts me off.
Yeah, the bads can kind of take away from any good points that they're making.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm just going to have a little bit of a whip down this list. These fallacies, including ad hominem, come under the relevance fallacies, i.e. they are not relevant. So when you're attacking the person, it's clearly not relevant to what he's saying. I think a lot of people would struggle with this. I think a lot of people look at that and say, well, why is it not relevant? He's a distrusted person, so therefore we should distrust his argument. That just simply is not the case. We have to look at the argument for itself and not for anything else, no external factors. And this is what these relevance fallacies are all about. And
I mean, you can almost flip what you just said on its head as well. Just because someone is trustworthy doesn't necessarily mean that they're correct in an argument.
That's right.
It might mean that the way they're arguing is honest, but it doesn't mean that they have the truth.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's another problem with the sort of aura of celebrity, I guess you could call it, at Speaker's Corner. You've got these people with the sort of name recognition, and you've kind of already bought into their argument before you've actually listened to it, sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
is this
some
someone I
people have got
support?
nicer voices, and it's all about the man. If someone's got a squeaky voice and somebody points that out, it's all about ad hominem, right?
There's an ad hominem that happens at the corner a lot. Someone like Hartoon gets shouted down and told that her voice is annoying, and it doesn't. People don't ever address, or people rarely address what she's saying. They just use insults to dismiss her. And I find it quite frustrating.
And it works all ways round, right? So you'll get a divisive character, like say a Raj or a Jedi.
Yeah.
And people will be on one side or the other, and they will disregard what Jedi says because they have an issue with him as a person. And in fact, he might be saying something completely truthful.
Yeah.
And I saw it with him and Bob were arguing. In fact, he was right and Bob was wrong. But people were saying to me, "Oh, did you see Bob? Win that argument? Actually, Jedi was correct." But they were playing the man, not the argument again. And
it's very difficult not to have your own biases, isn't it? It's certainly 2 or 3 arguments in to watching one of these guys, you tend to think that you're either siding with that individual or not, and really you need to look at each individual argument and not be swayed by who's speaking.
For sure.
Yeah, for sure.
It's tricky.
No, it is. So the next one is bandwagon fallacy. Has anyone come across this? Is
this appeal to popularity? Is this?
It's actually slightly different. It's similar but different. It's more about a fad. So something becomes like a fashionable thing, and you claim it's true because it's currently fashionable or currently popular. Whereas popularism is more about general popularity of a thing. At least that's my understanding of it.
I'll be honest, I don't quite see the distinction there, but I mean, we can go with that anyway. It's not a problem.
So the example that was given here is increasingly people are coming to believe that Eastern religions help us to get in touch with our true inner being. Therefore, Eastern religions help us to get in touch with our true inner being.
Oh, so it's more like a growth in popularity as opposed to like a sort of net popularity sort of thing.
Yeah, it's like everyone's on that bandwagon of saying, oh, the Buddhist thing or whatever it might be. And then they use it as an argument to say it must therefore be true because it's growing in popularity. It's becoming like a fashionable thing. Therefore, it's true.
Yeah, people are gravitating towards it because of how true it is or whatever. Got ya.
So this one's an interesting one.
Yeah.
Phallacist's fallacy.
I bet I know that one. Let me guess.
Go for it.
The fallacy of accusing someone else of making a fallacy. Is that it, maybe?
Yeah.
Like just pointing the finger.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, actually. I'm just looking at it here. So it's rejecting an idea as false simply because the argument offered for it is fallacious. So in other words, the conclusion, you are saying that the conclusion is false because one of the premises was fallacious.
And that's not necessarily true.
No, it's not.
The conclusion you can reach could be correct, even though how you got there was wrong. It just means that the methodology used wasn't reliable and should not be relied on. But that makes perfect sense.
No, it's interesting, that one. I like that one. So there's a nice example. It says people argue that there must be an afterlife because they just can't accept that when we die, that's it. So that's an appeal to consequence, which we'll come to in a minute. Therefore, there is no life after death. You see that? So the statement that there's an appeal to consequences, so they're using that as an argument that there is an afterlife. And because that argument is fallacious, therefore there cannot be an afterlife.
Right, okay.
Yeah, so you disregard the argument, you should disregard the argument rather than disregarding the
conclusion.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, and I think we do see things like this from opponents of religion.
So What did you call the fallacy? Because it sounded to me like the popularized version of it, the argument from incredulity.
I called it appeal to consequences, which we will come to in a
Right.
minute. That's
Sure.
yeah, that's a fallacy. So that's an interesting one, the fallacist's fallacy. I haven't actually come across that one before. That's really good. Not that I've come across many of these, I have to say. I get them all for you, Ross.
Yeah,
Ross is
there's
the
a
man.
lot.
Yeah. So the next one is the.
There's another one I've
Oh
seen.
no,
Go
for
ahead.
it. Yeah,
Sorry.
go for it. I was the
Oh,
fallacy.
it
Oh
just
no, you go for
just
yours. Go on, you say yours.
the no true Scotsman one, especially when it comes to
Oh, yeah.
eulogy and that sort of stuff, is rampant.
We'll come to that one in a minute because that one is awkward because apparently it doesn't fit. It fits into most of the categories.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so it's a
Yeah, I was
really
going to say,
interesting one.
since you've got the category list, you lead the way.
Okay, so we've got a fallacy of composition.
Right. So I'm familiar with the fallacy of composition and the fallacy of division.
Go for it.
Um,
Do both because one comes after the other.
well, the fallacy of composition is. Hold on, let me think of an example. So, just because some police officers are racist, the fallacy would be to assume that therefore the entire police force is racist.
Right.
Just because two of the players on my football team are world class doesn't mean that the football team itself is world class.
Or indeed all the players.
So is division to the inverse?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, exactly.
If there
the
are
same.
a few non-racists, it doesn't follow that there's no racism, sort of thing.
Yeah, just because, I mean, if the police force is systemically racist doesn't mean that an individual police officer is necessarily racist.
Yeah.
Or just because my house is half the size of your house doesn't mean the doors in my house are half the size of your doors.
The example given for the division is water is liquid, therefore H2O molecules are liquid.
Right.
So the component parts are not necessarily.
Yeah.
It doesn't hold true for the component parts. So that's the fallacy of division.
Can we think of a more relevant example?
What you thinking? A political example or?
Well, I suppose thinking about racism and racism in the police force is fairly.
It's a pretty
fairly
good,
politically motivated.
Well, you could say, for example, that there is systemic racism.
Yeah,
and therefore everyone in the system is racist, or
yeah, this policeman that I've chosen at random therefore must be racist.
Yeah, I've just seen an example here. I mean, I don't think it's the best one, but it basically says to a child, atoms are invisible, therefore the child is invisible because he is made of atoms. I mean, I don't necessarily like that example, but
that's an odd twist on it.
Because obviously atoms aren't invisible, but that's the example I've seen given here. Still kind of gets the point across though, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, Peach just making a couple of comments in the stream that bandwagon's connected to popularity, and we agree with that.
Yeah.
He's saying that he's not sure about the fallacy of composition.
It's just what you can assign to part of the group, you can't assign to the whole.
Yeah, I think that is pretty much it.
Sure, I mean,
gives an example.
Pete's extended it a little further.
Small, therefore, the wall is small would be an example. Yeah. We agree. We concur. The awkward thing, of course, of all of these is spotting them when they happen, because in mid-conversation, and it comes down to this argument of whether someone is being disingenuous, because that's another problem. Sometimes people accidentally commit these fallacies. Probably most of the time they do. And we shouldn't assume that they are deliberately doing it, because they're often not. And arguments break down because someone will start attacking someone based on the principle that they are being disingenuous.
I've found it's not good to quote fallacies at people either.
No, it doesn't go down too well usually.
Rubs them the wrong way.
Does a little, yeah. Especially if you say something like you're using the argument from ignorance, and they think you're calling them ignorant. It's
Well, this is a good one. The next one is the gambler's fallacy. Does anyone want to describe that?
That's the one about lucky streaks, isn't it? belief in weird statistics that don't make sense.
It's the idea that if you roll a dice and it rolls like 3 6s on the trot, that the next dice roll is less likely to be a 6.
Right. Whereas in reality, it's got
Just
1 in
as
6
like-
chance. Yeah.
And we do people experience this fallacy on the lottery, so they'll say, oh, the number 44 has come up quite a lot, therefore it won't come up next week, so I won't choose 44. There's a lot of strangeness with this. Like in the lottery, you get they pick random numbers, right? Because they think they're more likely to come up than sequences of numbers. So they'll say, well, 1 2 3 4 5 6 is less likely to come up than the random numbers that I have chosen. And in fact, when you look at 1 2 3 4 5 6, you realize just how improbable it is to get the 6 numbers, because people will look at that and say, well, that's never going to happen. But they don't think that of their own numbers, you know.
Yeah.
Am I right in saying the odds would be different if you said that you had to get 6 sequential numbers?
Yes.
That dramatically changes the odds, but 6 random numbers picked at
but any sequence of numbers is equally likely, right?
Yeah.
As any other sequence. But the way I do it with the dice is when someone rolls that 4th dice, so they roll 3 6s on the trot, and then they think that next
can't possibly be a 6.
Can't be, or is less likely to be a 6. And I say to them, do you think that the dice has changed?
Yeah.
Has it changed?
To some extent, we must all be guilty of this, though. Like, I'm not saying necessarily within argument, but if we were actually gambling, let's just say,
if I was playing roulette, I would be using this fallacy.
Yeah, nobody's going for the black 20 or whatever after it's come up twice in a
No, I agree. I would fall straight into this.
So it feels reasonable, right? That's the problem. And a lot of these fallacies do feel reasonable. Like, for example, calling someone an idiot, the ad hominem, it feels reasonable. If you think he's an idiot and the guy calls him an idiot in the argument, you think, well, that's kind of reasonable. He is an idiot, you know. So we all fall foul of these arguments. And that's why these fallacies endure, right? Because they seem reasonable a lot of the time. And yet they are, you know, they make the argument fallacious. And we need to jump on these things straight away when we hear people use
We need like a fallacy police force in Speaker's Corner that they don't participate in any conversations other than when they hear a fallacy, they just like raise a red flag or something out of nowhere.
We need a referee, and what they could do is, and it doesn't matter whether it's Jordan Peterson, Sam Harris, or whatever, or anyone. We could have a referee that says a fallacy is committed. Exactly, gives them a yellow card or a red card or something.
Yeah, I mean, the problem is when we have moderators at the park, it's more like person A really doesn't get along with person B and they're yelling at each other, so we need someone just to keep the peace rather than
like a moderator, for sure.
Yeah, rather than actually like making a productive.
But it would be an interesting challenge, wouldn't it, to people that like to debate, like the folks at the corner, to say, look, we're going to have a debate now, any topic, and we're going to put you out if you commit a logical fallacy, and we'll see who lasts, because I think most people, including ourselves, wouldn't last.
Fallacy deathmatch.
Fallacy deathmatch, exactly. Because I think
have
most
a tournament system for it.
And it would, it would be fun as well when we could, tournament exactly, and give a prize or something. I wouldn't mind paying for a prize to see that happen.
Some of the classic arguments at the corner, like I say at the corner, but like things like the Kalam cosmological argument or the watchmakers analogy, like these contain fallacious arguments, and they're like famous arguments. They're some of the most famous, the famous and most best and the best arguments put forwards by people, and they're filled with fallacious problems.
Yeah,
I mean, it's certainly true of it's tempting to say that religious folks commit these fallacies, more than anyone else, but it's not true. I see atheists commit these fallacies all the time.
Agreed.
And in fact, case in point, recently I saw an argument about the and we've had it on here about the animal cruelty argument that Phil was using, and I don't think it follows. I think it's fallacious, within the paradigm. I think it's somewhat fallacious. So there's a lot of these kind of arguments there that you could definitely pick just about everybody up on them. So yeah,
remind me, what was the animal argument?
The animal argument was that God is cruel to animals. We can prove that animals feel pain, and and therefore, there's no justification for it, basically. But of course, the problem is within the religious paradigm, God has full control. So once you accept God exists, which you have to in order to have the argument about what God is doing, you have to accept that God could make animals appear to have a consciousness when in fact they don't. In other words, they're automata that look like they feel pain but actually don't feel pain, because we can't prove consciousness, right? We can't prove that we are aware of our pain.
No, we're drifting towards hard solipsism here, and not being able to prove we're not brains in a jar.
Exactly.
I mean, that seems to me though that kind of leans more towards you're trying to push the opponent towards, was it like a reductio ad absurdum? Basically, you just try and make them sound so silly so as to win the crowd. But again, you're not really meant to try and win the crowd. You're meant to actually.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, as an atheist, right?
Genuine argument.
Animals feel pain. To me, it's self-evident, right? That to assume, but it is an assumption. In the same way that we assume that we all are consciously aware. I know that I'm aware, but I can't prove that you are.
I'm assuming you're not all figments of my imagination.
Exactly, it's an assumption, but it's a fair assumption, and it's a functional assumption. But once you go down the religious route, it gets tricky, because God can do anything, right? He's omnipotent, omniscient.
Yeah.
The fact that we have the free will argument is neither here nor there. We'll come to that another day.
Yeah. I mean, that's.
But that's another thing altogether. But anyway, so let's have a look at some more. So we've got the genetic fallacy.
Is that just like just because certain behaviors are encouraged by genetics, it justifies it or something? Like, I'm not sure.
No, it is dismissing an argument because of its source.
Right.
So because James made the argument, it's invalid. But because Sym made the argument, it's valid. I suppose it's a little like an ad hominem.
I was going to say that strikes me just as an ad hom at that point. Then.
Well, it feels to me more like an appeal to authority. It's sort of in the same.
It could be
in reverse. Yeah. In reverse, yeah.
Let's have a look, because I think I saw that on my list.
I'll give you. This is a silly argument. There's actually a couple of arguments here.
Dismissing photographs of the Earth because NASA took them.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So it is literally just the inverse of You don't trust the source, therefore their conclusion is wrong.
You can actually accept or reject, though, on the genetic fallacy, based on the source.
Right. So so you trust the source, therefore the conclusion is correct. Which is how does that differ from the appeal? I guess there is slight differences to the appeal to authority.
I'll give you two sort of interesting examples here. My mummy told me that the tooth fairy is real, therefore the tooth fairy is real.
Yeah.
Right. And the other one is eugenics was pioneered in Germany during the World War, therefore eugenics is a bad thing.
Right. Yeah.
It's that kind of argument, and you can see how that would work, right?
Yeah. Because of its origin, it's therefore flawed, or it's therefore not worth looking at.
Now, there's a whole bunch of appeals now that come under these relevance fallacies, and they're all irrelevant appeals, they're called. So we'll just run through them. So we've got appeal to antiquity or tradition.
Yeah. You see that?
We've been doing this for hundreds of years, therefore it must be right.
You see that a lot in the
we get
vegan arguments.
Yeah, we get we've always been eating meat, therefore meat eating is good. We've always had men and women living this way, therefore men and women must always live this way. These are common arguments. Then we've got the classic appeal to authority. We see that at the corner all the time. Are you a scholar? This was written by a scholar.
Well, to some degree, I don't have a problem with an appeal to authority. It's fallacious appeal to authority that is more problematic. Is like if I were to appeal to Dawkins when I was talking about physics, or
no, but you'd have to actually show what Dawkins did, right? So
Yeah,
you can't say Einstein said it, therefore it is true. You'd have to show what Einstein said in order to bolster your argument, right?
sure, but I mean, if
like
I
you can't
were
name drop. You actually have to explain their position and how it
Like
sort
if
of.
me and you were discussing it, Ross, right, and we basically agreed, but you could say to me, well, just to let you know, it was said by that person. It might help me some way, but if we're actually having a proper argument, you can't use it in an argument, right? In an actual debate.
well, let's use an example. Say for example, we were talking about something medical, and I appealed to the top doctors and use them as references. That is potentially a valid appeal to authority. Whereas if you were to appeal to a pig farmer and use him as a reference when it came to medical practices, that would be an invalid appeal to authority. Does that make sense? Like,
no, it does.
I'm not saying
I understand it completely, but I think in terms of the actual logic of the argument, it doesn't hold water.
Yeah, it's one may be more credible than the other, but it doesn't then follow that the one who's more credible is correct.
no.
I mean, we
just
know
because a doctor gives
sorry.
certain advice with regards to, let's say, diet, it doesn't mean that they're actually giving you sound diet advice.
No, agreed. But I think you're on safer ground appealing to them as an authority than you
For
would
sure,
be.
yeah, they're a more credible source. Yeah, it just doesn't follow that they're sort of like objectively correct. I don't think it's. Yeah, I'm pretty much on board with you. Like, depending on the authority appealed to.
Yeah.
And the actual argument happening as well, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the reason I'm defending it is I'm probably guilty of committing it.
Everyone probably is to some extent, right?
I mean, we've got classic examples, haven't we, in history?
I mix it up with the appeal to authority as well. Like, I would say the majority of the scientific community believe this to be true, and I would use that as a way of supporting the argument that I'm already making, if that makes sense.
Even though we know that consensus is not a scientific scientific concept.
Agreed.
And a lot of people think it is. They really think it is, and it isn't.
It's basically just a shorthand method of, like, you can't, if you can't adequately explain the points made by those scientists, you kind of settle for just accepting what they say, as opposed to sort of like being able to explain it yourself. Whereas ideally you would actually have like a full grasp of what it is they're saying, and then you could sort of expand upon it and explain to the person you're talking why it bolsters your side of the argument.
I would certainly expect people to have a rudimentary understanding of the arguments that are being put forward. But yeah, you can't expect everybody to have a degree in astrophysics or
yeah, for sure.
We just have to
more forgivable than others.
We just have to say we don't know at that point, don't we? If we're appealing to a source, all we can say is go off and check that source. We can't say, therefore, my argument is true.
This is the argument I've heard. This is the argument that is best supported or
I mean, you basically
most popular.
You just cannot use it. I mean, it seems like you can, but you just cannot use it. Or you're basically left saying you've got to trust someone at this point, which is not the nature of logical argument, right? Is to say you just have to trust. That's not deducing. That's not deducing truth.
I suppose all I'm saying is there are experts in this field that understand this particular subject better than we do, and their view is this.
In which case, they need to have the argument, and we need to listen to them rather than saying that they're true. If you know what I mean.
That gets into the territory of, well, this guy's smart, so he's correct, and that guy's dumb, so he's wrong, kind of thing. Like, it might be true 9 times out of 10, but for the sake of the actual discussion, it doesn't follow.
No. I don't think I would say that. Therefore, this is true, but I think it's good supporting evidence. Like if 99% of the experts in the field believe a particular fact, then you're appealing to that particular argument, I don't think there's harm in identifying that this is not really disputed. This is.
I think if we saw
I'm
it
sort
written,
of drifting into.
yeah, I think if we saw it written as a sort of statement, though, we would balk at it. So if we were having an argument and we saw, oh, and it was said by this person, you know what I mean? It basically would have to say, you know what, that's irrelevant actually. You know, like we need to know, in order to deduce the truth, we need to know what their arguments are. And there's common examples going back in history where prominent figures have been completely wrong.
Of course.
And have held these views. So we've got appeal to consequences.
I'm not familiar with that one.
Sym?
I was going to say. No, I mean, it gives me the kind of vibe that it might have some sort of link to the slippery slope, but it probably doesn't.
It's basically saying, as far as I can tell, that if the consequences are good, it must be true.
Right, got you.
And if the consequences are bad, it must be false, if you see what I mean.
Right.
So let me just read a little bit about this. There's a couple of examples. Maybe I've got this wrong. Appeal to good consequences, for example. If belief in God, then you'll find a kind of fulfillment in life that you'll never felt before. Therefore, God exists.
Right. Because belief in God potentially has a positive outcome, God must exist.
Right. If you don't believe in God, then you'll be miserable, thinking that life doesn't have any meaning. Therefore, God exists.
Right.
There's sort of on the Pascal's wager is an example. I think is what when they use that, when they say you should believe in God because probability. You know, like like what if it's true? Like if it's false, then it doesn't matter because all you've done is pray a little bit. But if it turns out to be true, then you're going to hell, and so therefore it's a wager. It's a very sort of similar kind of concept.
I've never found that overly convincing.
I think the problem is we've got to find examples, and perhaps we should have done a bit more research. We find some examples where we would fall foul of those examples ourselves. So religious ones, as atheists, we're not going to fall foul of them, but
no.
Religious folks might. So there's appeal to force.
Again, not particularly familiar with it. Is it might is right?
Yes, it was also called argument with a cudgel. If you don't accept that the sun orbits the earth rather than the other way around, then you'll be excommunicated from the church.
Right.
Therefore, the sun orbits the earth. Seems pretty obvious, doesn't it? If someone's going to beat you up unless you accept it's true. It's not that far removed from some of what we sometimes see, that people are bullying people into accepting a position.
Yeah.
And I think that's true in every single group that we see at the corner, for example. To a degree, it might be that you're being ridiculed. So it might not be physical force, it might be the threat of ridicule, for example.
Sure.
That you don't take a position.
Being outcast.
Being outcast, yeah, exactly. And if it happens enough, you end up sort of believing it in a way. You know, you end up sort of taking that on board. And I've definitely suffered from that in arguments where I've sort of backed down because there's some sort of fear of being made to look stupid.
Right, but you don't actually buy into the opposition argument, though, right? It's not. It's like more a means of you silence the opposition, but you don't necessarily.
Sure.
I mean, I guess you could make the argument that by virtue of silencing your opponent, you kind of.
Well, people find it hard, don't they?
People spread your sort of argument.
Well, the racism thing, for example, was a classic. So people feel browbeaten.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. With the
if you make a certain argument about genetics or about some particular aspect of it, you could be labelled racist and therefore outcast.
Right. Or if maybe you're talking about something that has racial connotations, and people will browbeat you into accepting, and people do actually, you know, they might sort of still hold it to be true, but it a lot of the time it does affect the way they think and feel about something by being kind of like effectively browbeaten into accepting an argument. I'm probably like
again,
pushing it a bit there, but there's something there to it, I think.
Again, I don't think it's something I'm particularly familiar with. Again, like you say, as an atheist at the corner, we all believe all sorts of different things. Like we're not quite as uniform. But if I were to say to you, I'm drifting towards the no true Scotsman here, but if you don't believe this, then you're a heretic. You're not a true Christian, or you're not a true Muslim. If you don't believe that Jesus died on the cross and was risen again, then you're not a Christian.
I've definitely seen that. I've definitely experienced that, where people are forced to accept an argument because they are being told that they are not the thing that they know they are.
Yeah.
That's commonplace, and that also is, you've got the sort of intersectional stuff where you've got groups within a group browbeating another group into accepting their position. So yeah, that's definitely the case. So the next one is appeal to novelty, and it's the opposite of an appeal to antiquity.
Or it's new, so it must be right.
String theory is the most relevant development in physics, therefore string theory is true.
Right.
Religion is old-fashioned, atheism is more recent development, therefore atheism is true.
I'd question the premise on
seems obvious.
That last statement.
That seems self-evident.
Yeah, I can't imagine many people. I'm just trying to think of examples. Like, I don't feel like I've seen that much, like that deployed that much, at least at the corner.
But it is true. You do get people espousing those sort of new ideas, in such a way that,
because they're new, they have some sort of extra credibility.
Well, I think that's true of conspiracy theorists, for example. Like, so something new comes up, and they're telling everyone this is the truth. Do you know what I mean? You get that often with conspiracy. Oh, I've read this, and this guy's just worked it all out. It has to be true.
Yeah, I guess.
I think we're the worst people, aren't we, to be judging these things?
I think I'm occasionally guilty of something along those lines. Like when I speak to Beyond Atheist, and he's talking about the old gods or ancient beliefs, and I'm not consciously but sort of subconsciously dismissing them because they're old ideas, outdated ideas, and we have more modern, better understanding of the world. So I guess to some degree I'm guilty of it.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good example, actually. It's Beyond Atheism, by the way. I think you called it Beyond Atheist.
Yeah, Beyond Atheism.
Sorry, Imran. Sorry, Imran. The next one is appeal to pity.
Right. I've heard it called appeal to emotion before. Yeah. I guess that's the same sort of thing. You have to agree with me because I'm going to make you feel bad or feel uncomfortable or feel guilty if you don't.
Well, the racism issue definitely falls into this.
I was going to say, yeah, I was thinking more along the lines as well of like the transgender argument sort of thing. Like,
Yep. This is
like,
this is your social justice warrior stuff.
You're going to cause us to commit suicide, that sort of thing. Like,
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
The example given here is pro-life campaigners have recently adopted a strategy that capitalises on the strength of appeals to pity by showing images of aborted fetuses. Anti-abortion materials seek to disgust people and so turn them against the practice of abortion.
Yeah.
It's very effective, right?
Yeah, of course. Of course, we're all emotional beings, and it's easy to pull their heartstrings.
I think that's just, again, one of those sort of like almost like shortcut tactics. Like, because as opposed to having to like properly formulate a whole argument to have with someone outside of like a clinic or whatever, you can just whack a picture on a banner.
Yeah.
And sort of probably be even more effective, to be honest with you.
Apparently they showed...
I see this a lot from vegans at the moment, recently. I get a lot of posts of animals, slaughterhouses, animals being abused. And I fully acknowledge that it's horrific, but it does feel somewhat like an appeal to emotion.
Apparently, US jury was shown graphic images of people burned to death in the 9/11 September attacks. On the Pentagon, the jurors will decide whether Al-Qaeda plotter Sicarius Missouri should be executed or jailed for life. So prosecutors hope such emotional evidence will persuade the jury to opt for the death penalty.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm sure I pronounced that guy's name. I do apologise. Completely wrong. Zacharias I got right, but the Masui, I don't know, got it wrong. I'm sure. So yeah, so that's pretty. That is actually used, basically, is what we're saying. Even though it seems like a strange one, it's used all the time.
Yeah, I mean, I'm probably guilty of that as well, actually. When you mentioned the, maybe on the pro-life front, I'm trying to think. I wouldn't be surprised if I've probably deployed that in pro-life discussions. Not images or anything like that, but making probably emotional appeals.
But you're not, in that case, it's not such a problem because you're not concerned with the truth so much as you are, people converting to your ideology, right? Which is a bit different. Whereas these, like using it in a jury, is terrible because you're supposed to be like on the side of truth, but actually what you're on the side of is corrupting your jury to.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, in that case, it's completely.
But if you're trying to save someone's
wrong.
life by appealing to pity, that seems sensible. And you're trying to save lives, animal lives, whatever. It kind of seems more valid. It's not a debate of truth. It's a way to make it happen.
Would you say that about your own mother? Or what if someone did that to your children?
Yeah.
Like these are all appeals to emotion. And I acknowledge that they're kind of valid in some ways, but I suppose it's about making people realise what they're actually talking about and trying to ground them. But
yeah, I think it's basically like what James said. Whether we're dealing with sort of like an ethical discussion,
yeah,
or whether we're like literally trying to ascertain guilt, which is pretty much a binary yes or no kind of thing.
Yeah.
So we've got appeal to popularity. Well, we all know this one.
50 billion people can't be wrong.
Yeah, what is it? 17 point, whatever it is, billion people can't be wrong. Million people, sorry. Brexit. I'm pro Brexit, by the way, so I'm happy. But even though we're not going to get it, I'm happy with the vote.
Not happening.
It's not happening, but I'm happy with the vote.
51% voted to leave, therefore it must be a good choice.
Yeah, and that can't be true because we have to prove it with the arguments, right? Not by saying how many people voted for it. But we'd still win. I just want to put that in there. Still would. We haven't got time right now, but we would still win. Me and Sym would still win. So we've got appeal to poverty.
Don't know.
So is that tied to like appeal to pity?
Yeah, it's pretty much if it's held by the poor, it must be true. The example given is the working classes respect family and community ties, therefore respect for family and community ties is virtuous.
That just seems madness to me.
So there's almost like a popularity aspect to it then as well, right? Like
it's the opposite of the appeal to wealth.
Right.
Yeah, I'm not sure I divide society like that. I don't think I could. That seems like mixing up class system with truth. I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure I'd ever.
I think it's because maybe, I don't know, maybe you anticipate heavy bias on the side of either those in poverty or those in sort of like extreme. So they maybe kind of opt to take the medium position, like the sort of average working man. Not that obviously it follows.
Manny's just said, that as you guys were saying, human beings are emotional creatures, so it's a very persuasive argument. All of these arguments, they're all emotional.
Yeah, it's why they work and why they stick around. Like you said earlier, these are all things that help you win a discussion, but aren't necessarily, when you look at the detail, they're not necessarily valid or logical.
And if we're going to talk about appeal to wealth, I think we have to mention Trump, because wealth has been a big
I'm
factor.
rich.
Yeah, wealth
I'm
has been a big
rich.
factor in Trump's popularity, apparently.
So what? He's rich, so he knows what he's doing. Therefore, what he does is right. Is that the
Yes,
kind of gist of it?
he's achieved greatness. Therefore, you know, his argument. I mean, certainly they claimed that the black vote in America, um, although it usually goes to the Democrats, blacks did vote for Trump. You know, a lot of blacks vote for Trump because within the black community, they do value that kind of wealth.
It's like a sort of like a bootstrap sort of mentality sort of thing.
Yeah, I think it's
Aspirational sort of the American
wealth is
dream.
associated with everything that's good, especially when you've got the ideology of capitalism and obtaining wealth. And let's be fair here. What we mean by wealth is disparity, right? That's what it is.
Well,
It's
yeah.
having more
Yeah.
than somebody else. It's not. People sometimes think of wealth as being in some sort of absolute position. There's no such thing.
Yeah, I don't want to start an anti-Trump rant, but didn't he start with £1 million given to him by his father?
You did, yeah, apparently by his own admission, which he claimed was nothing. He sort of claimed he was a blue-collar guy, right? That started off with $1 million.
Sorry, $1 million, not yeah.
But of course, his father had more, right? So he was going to inherit more.
Yeah.
This is only what he started with. But anyway, the appeal to wealth, yeah, that's that definitely carries weight. Probably not as much as the appeal to authority, but it's almost like an authority, right? Especially when the capitalism is a dominant force in your society, like it is in the United States. Wealth and authority go hand in hand.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, when you value success, then the authority on that is those who are successful, which is the wealthy people. So.
Exactly. So we're out of the appeals and we're into some more fallacies. So we've got the moralistic fallacy.
I'm not sure what that
because
is.
It sounds moral, it's right, and because it sounds immoral, it's wrong, or
it's the opposite of the naturalistic fallacy.
Because it's natural, it's right.
I'm guessing the moralistic fallacy is because it's moral, it's right. But let's have a look. The naturalistic fallacy proves from descriptions of how things are to statements of how things ought to be. The moralistic fallacy does the reverse.
Say again?
Let me read it. Let me read the next bit. The moralistic fallacy moves from statements about how things ought to be to statements about how things are. It assumes that the world is as it should be, right?
Right.
So that's the fallacy, right? So an example is, have you ever crossed a one-way street without looking in both directions? If you have, reasoning that people shouldn't be driving the wrong way up the one-way street, so there's no risk of being run over from that direction, then you've committed a moralistic fallacy. So you're saying it's ought to be this, and I've actually heard this in arguments a lot of the time.
Yeah. I've heard it referred to as the is ought fallacy. Actually, is
Right.
Yeah. It ought to be this, and you get that a lot. So you're going down the argument, and then eventually they'll say, well, it ought to be like that.
Yeah. Yeah, but that's not necessarily dealing with reality, is it?
Yeah.
No.
So that leads to the naturalistic fallacy, which is you're dealing with how things are and then making a claim about how things ought to be. Right? So you're saying we eat meat, therefore we should eat meat.
Sure. And the reverse would be we ought not to eat meat, therefore we don't eat meat. Like
we shouldn't eat meat or something like that.
Shouldn't eat meat. Right.
So we've got the red herring. Well, we all know what that one is. Who wants to give a nice example of a red herring?
Well,
it's known as a debate tactic, apparently.
Yeah. This is countering someone else's point by going off on a tangent or giving a counter argument without addressing what they've said.
Do you know where it comes from, guys?
No.
It gets its name from fox hunting. So they used to use smoked herrings, which are red, to distract hounds from the scent of their quarry.
Right.
So you're using a red herring to distract the thing
from the hunt.
From the hunt, yeah. It's interesting.
Makes sense.
I see this one an awful lot, an awful lot. Rather than addressing something your opponent is saying, you attack your opponent's position.
Especially if they've got you pinned, like if they've got you right where they want you, like in a sticky situation, and then you just kind of try to avoid it and sort of take the discussion elsewhere.
Yeah, I hate to keep using religious examples, but I see this between Muslims and Christians quite a lot, where one will raise an issue with the other one's text and address the issue. The other one will point at the other one's text.
Whataboutism at that point, right? Like, turns into pointing fingers instead of actually addressing the point made.
Agreed.
Yeah, whataboutism's a pretty common one.
There is someone at the corner that is guilty of it all the time. I won't mention any names.
I'm willing to bet 99% of people at the corner are probably guilty of whataboutism, to be honest.
Yeah, no,
it's that pervasive.
Yeah. It's a popular one to win an argument, that one. So then we've got weak analogy. I think that's quite a common one, isn't it?
Yeah. I'm trying to think of a good example, but I mean, we've all heard weak analogies where the two just aren't comparable or don't match up at all.
Watches in the universe.
Ali
Darwood did the mobile phone in the universe.
Yeah. Are you talking about the watchmaker's analogy?
Yeah.
A watch is complex. The universe is complex. A watch has a creator, therefore the universe has a creator.
Yeah, that's a weak analogy.
Yeah, because you could make the same analogy. A watch is man-made, therefore the universe is man-made. For me, that's almost correlation and causation. That like just because two things share one quality doesn't mean they share another.
I mean, if basically the argument is if the analogy is strong, then that's fine. Then you've got a strong premise. But if you've got a weak analogy, then it's a weak premise.
Yeah.
And therefore it's not true. I mean, it can't be said to be true, right? So therefore we can't draw any conclusions. We can't say that the conclusion is true.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we're moving on. So that's fallacies of relevance, all of those that we just covered. Now we've got fallacies of ambiguity. Now this is an interesting one. I don't know if you guys are coming. Accent fallacies.
Rings a bell, but I wouldn't be able to tell you anything about it.
Very interesting. This is where, accent fallacies are fallacies that depend on where the stress is placed in a word or sentence. So the meaning of the words may be dramatically changed by the way they are spoken without changing any of the words themselves. They are a type of equivocation fallacy.
Does it give it like so? Just the way in which a person speaks, basically. Like,
there's an example. I don't know if I'm going to do it justice, but suppose that two people are debating whether a rumor about the actions of a third person is true. The first says, "I can imagine him doing that. It's possible." And the second replies, "Yes, it's possible to imagine him doing that." This looks like an agreement. If, however, the second person stresses the word imagine, then the appearance vanishes. Yes, it's possible to imagine him doing that. This now sounds like a pointed comment
when you say it like that.
Yeah.
Can anyone give a better example or run with that?
I think that sounds all right.
Yeah, that's not bad.
The last bit illustrated it pretty well.
It's very close to, I'm guessing, it's a subset of false equivocation.
Yes.
It's along very, very, very similar lines.
So now we're on to false equivocation. So you want to run with that, Ross?
Well, essentially, it's using a word that has two different meanings or multiple different meanings, and using them in the same sentence or the same argument, but using them in two different ways and not identifying that you're using them in two different ways. So the law of gravity the law of gravity is a law. Laws can be overturned, therefore the law of gravity can be overturned, and that's conflating the concept of law within a scientific frame, and halfway through the analogy, I'm swapping over to a legal sense of the word law, and the two aren't comparable and should not be used in the same way.
There's an example here, real world example. There's a silly example and there's a real world example. The real world example is Christianity teaches that faith is necessary for salvation. Faith is irrational. It is a belief in the absence of or contrary to evidence. Therefore, Christianity teaches that irrationality is rewarded.
Right. Well, for me, maybe I am falsely equivocating, but I'm not seeing the distinction in the use of the word faith. I mean, maybe we need a religious person here to argue about what they mean when they say the word faith.
How about Jesus is the Word of God, the Bible is the Word of God, therefore Jesus is the Bible?
Yeah,
that works.
Yep.
Yeah, that works.
Yeah. I mean, they seem ludicrous, but then again, when you actually analyze a lot of these fallacies, you realize just how ludicrous they are, and therefore we should be able to identify them, and yet we most often fail to identify them because we're caught up in the emotional state of believing one side or the other.
Again, with the religious angle, I'm afraid, but the theory, the word theory, the most common example that I see at the corner. It's only a theory, and that's conflating theory in common usage to scientific theory, which is, I mean, theory in common usage is essentially a hypothesis in science, and the usage of those two words is people use it incorrectly to support their arguments.
I have seen it recently, and I can't remember what it was, but it was definitely a misuse of a word. It was being used in two different ways, but I can't remember what the argument was now, but I came across it. And it wasn't, this is the problem with the fallacies, is you come away from arguments and then you realise all the fallacies that have been committed. What we should do after this, not today, but on another day, we should go through some of the videos. The three of us and analyse, but we can't be partisan, right? So we need to pick, we need to do an atheist one and a
someone we support,
we support, like an atheist one, a Christian one, a Muslim one, and so forth, and just sort of pick it apart for the fallacies that are being committed, but in a non-partisan way, basically.
Turn it into fallacy bingo or something.
Now, we covered the last fallacy of ambiguity is the straw man, and we've already covered that one. So now we're on the fallacies of presumption. So this first one is interesting, probably in Sym's picture, which is the affirming the consequent.
Let's have a look at that. Did you say that was on my one?
I assumed it would be, but because I think this one's quite popular.
I don't see it on.
I'm not familiar with that wording. I might know it once we get into it. I was going
to say if it's known by a different name, maybe.
So it's basically the fallacy of affirming the consequent is committed by arguments that have the form. So you've got if A then B, right? B. So if A then B, B is true, therefore A. So in other words, you're saying that because B is true, the thing that caused B is true. Which is not, what I'm saying is if it says if A then B, B could be true without A being true, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, because it's not if it was if A and only if A, then that would be the case, right? But because it's if A then B does not mean.
Gotcha.
So for example, if you smash me on the leg, my leg breaks, my leg is broken, does not mean that because my leg is broken, you smash me on the leg.
No.
Right?
Agreed.
Maybe I got run over by a car or something. But that's affirming the consequent, which is an interesting one.
I see a lot of these. For me, that I don't know if we've mentioned it already, but the null hypothesis takes care of a lot of these a lot of these
do
fallacies.
you want to just explain that, Ross?
Oh, it's a big topic, but
Just give the broad definition of the correlation problem.
Simply put, A and B are not connected unless you can first demonstrate that A and B are connected.
So the null hypothesis being that we assume no connection.
Yeah. Default position is that two events or two facts are not connected. You have to demonstrate that they're connected.
I think it was in that Dialectic versus Peterson debate, wasn't it, that Peterson was committing the null hypothesis, was basically violating the null hypothesis.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Occam's razor, I think, as well, in the same, all in the same debate. But that's Jordan Peterson for you. We're going to do an analysis of Jordan Peterson at some point.
Do we have to?
Yeah, we have to show that he just constantly.
Do you know? I don't mind watching Peterson.
No,
he's
a good orator, but
yeah, I won't say I'm a fan, but he's enjoyable enough to listen to.
To be fair, I agree with a lot of what he says. It's just
he wraps up
when
some
he gets
woo-woo
cornered,
in there, doesn't he, as well?
Yeah, when he gets into the religious aspect, it gets all a bit weird, right? Because like
the word salad comes out, and he just
taking a more like metaphorical position on it, but then like he then starts bloody who's the guy he loves to speak about? Oh my God, it's not Kant, the philosopher. He's completely gone out of my head.
Jung. He speaks about Carl Jung.
Carl Jung. That's it. Yeah, Carl Jung. Yeah, like it all just descends into like his teachings about like the shadow, and it's like all this deep psychology stuff, and like obviously when you're a layperson's talking about religion, he's just talks about it in such a different way. They might as well be two separate things.
Yeah. To me, he's in many ways committing false equivocation fallacies. He's comparing his version of Christianity or his beliefs about Christianity to commonly held beliefs about Christianity, and I don't think those two equate necessarily.
You could basically say what he talks about isn't Christianity, to be honest with you. It just happens to like feed from the Christian doctrine or something like that. But I don't think a lot of people would sort of regard him as Christian per se. Would be interesting to do a video like one of you said. I can't remember too much about the Dillahunt conversation. It's been a while since I watched it.
Oh, I think Peter's mentioned Dostoevsky, which he loves to quote as well.
Oh yeah,
Peterson loves his Dostoevsky.
Loves him, yeah. And who wrote the Gulag? Solzhenitsyn. As well.
Yeah.
I actually downloaded the Gulag Archipelago actually, so I do.
Well, because it's a bit of it's a sort of an appeal to authority in a way. It's not really appeal to authority. There's something else there, but it kind of, by quoting these people, it raises his status, And I see Dennis has been doing a good job. Well done, Dennis. He's been keeping it real in the chat. Thank you, Dennis. So we now get into one with all of these. I think we now know, which is that we've got the arguing from ignorance.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And somebody want to explain that, Sim?
Sorry, the argument from ignorance, you were saying?
Yeah.
Trying to think about the best way to put it into an example. Hang on. Right. Well,
so I have an example. Do you want me to read an example?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah,
okay. Got an example. No one has been able to disprove the existence of God, therefore God exists.
Well, yeah, actually, yeah, that's the obvious one.
Yeah, that's like the best one I can think of.
It's like a perfect summary, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Arguments from ignorance infer that the proposition is true from the fact that it is not known to be false.
Yeah, because you can't disprove it, I will assume it to be true.
Yeah, and we...
Well, not even assume it to be true, actually. Like, actively
this really gets my goat, because this is the sort of proof of a negative, yeah? Can you disprove it? You get that a lot.
Well, that's shifting.
That's another one with the whole God thing, right?
Yeah. I don't know if that's a fallacy, a particular fallacy, but it certainly annoys the hell out of me.
Yeah, it should be if it's not, because it is one of those ones that pisses people off.
It's shifting of the burden of proof, isn't it?
It's the free will one as well, isn't it? So
Yeah.
people say, well, you've got to prove there's no such thing as free will. So it's always trying to put the burden of proof on the to prove the negative, and it just doesn't work that way. I mean, proving negatives is incredibly difficult. Proving positives is possible.
Yeah.
And the example I always give is pigs flying, right? So in order to we don't assume pigs fly, right? We don't say pigs fly because you haven't proven that they don't. Pigs don't fly until such time as we prove that they do. Now, in order to prove pigs fly, we only have to find one flying pig, and now we have an example of a flying pig. Pigs now fly potentially.
If you claim pigs fly, the burden of proof is incumbent upon you to demonstrate that the claim you've made is true.
Right.
It's not incumbent upon me to disprove that claim.
Whereas trying to prove that pigs don't fly, you would have to show all pigs in the past didn't fly, all pigs in the future won't fly, and even if you find a bunch of pigs, they might just be not flying because they don't want to fly right now. So you're still completely stuck proving pigs don't fly. Now, I was just going to think of the religious one there, where you say God doesn't exist. There's another example, and it's slipped my memory. I just had it then. That's used all the time. Oh, the free will one, of course, we were saying. So I know what I wanted to say. So atheism came about in the term was coined in England in the late 1500s and 16th century. And prior to that, of course, we had the existence of God. Now, the problem being that it's so far in the past, the concept of a monotheistic God, that it should have been incumbent on those individuals that come up with it way back when. But because it now becomes the norm, and then suddenly someone says, well, let's add this concept of an atheist, people now say, well, that's the newer term. You've got to prove that. You've got to prove that there's no God. But that's just not true. It should the burden of proof is back with those guys that come up with it.
Yeah.
That depends slightly on what sort of atheist we're talking about. If we're talking about more of an anti-theist or hard atheist, then
they have a burden. They have a burden. Yeah.
They're claiming that no God exists, and they are therefore burdening themselves with the requirement for proof. But
I mean, it's just whoever's making the assertion, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
So we deny the evidence. That's what we deny, that the evidence is compelling.
Yeah.
But we do not deny the existence of God as a soft atheist.
No. Yeah. I don't believe there's a God, but that's not the same thing as saying there is no God.
We should have Rob on at some point, because I think he is tending towards a hard atheist, because he says he's been convinced by those that are smarter than him, I think was the phrase he used.
Right.
And I'm not at all convinced. I'm on my side, but I think that Dialectic is in the soft atheist camp, or was last time I checked.
I think, honestly, I think he's. I tend towards being a hard atheist for the religions that I've actually looked at. I don't believe in. I actively believe that the Abrahamic God doesn't exist, whereas I'm not dismissive of the possibility of a first cause or a creator, or if you're talking about a pantheist belief where God is the universe, then all of these.
But again, what you're really saying is the evidence is no good, right? It's not compelling.
Yeah.
So you're not you're not really denying.
No. Well, no, I don't.
You're living as though you were a hard atheist, but like for the purpose of actual debate, you wouldn't say that you can disprove the existence of the Abrahamic God.
Not at all. Not at all. I think that would be a silly position to take. But I would say Dialectic holds a similar position in as much as he doesn't think gods exist, but for the purposes of debate, he takes a slightly more reserved position, which is without a burden of proof.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems weird. Why would someone even want to put the burden of proof on their shoulders for something which they cannot prove? Like, it just doesn't. I don't know. It just doesn't make sense to me.
But could they argue? This is interesting. Could religious folks argue that we're being disingenuous because we because some of
Would-
us do, we deny it emotionally.
Yeah, we're intentionally ducking the burden because we know we can't.
Are we ducking the burden? That's I've often thought this, to deliberately win.
Yeah, but then you could basically say, regardless of who has the burden, right? If we have the burden, we can't prove it. If they have the burden, they can't prove it. So at that point, they effectively neutralize each other. They cancel each other out.
So
and all you're left with
we don't
is
know.
the compelling evidence.
Yeah.
And there isn't any for the gods. So you just have to assume.
So we're both forced to be soft atheists, basically.
Yeah, I mean, philosophically speaking, we're agnostic.
Yeah, I don't like that term because that's about knowledge, right? And you're saying we have the knowledge and we're unsure. It's a tricky one, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it depends. It depends how you're defining the words. I don't want to get into a semantics argument about it, but yeah, I mean, I'm happy with it, either term. Soft.
We've gone.
I don't actually like
on a tangent here.
yeah. Bogged down in atheism.
Yeah. That's for another one, I think. So we've got begging the question or circular reasoning. Anyone want to go with that, Ross? Sym?
Is that
I always use that phrase, but I don't think I'd necessarily use it in the context of a fallacy, to be honest.
An argument is circular if its conclusion is among its premises.
So Zog the Great is real because the great book of Zog the Great says he's real, and we know that the book of Zog is true because it was written by Zog the Great.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. So it begs the question. Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah.
There's an example here. Let's see if I can find a real world example.
I mean, it is literally, you can just draw that parallel with God, right? I mean, that's basically just.
I was trying to avoid. I was trying to avoid to always make it about religion. But
it's mean, isn't it? It's about religion. Typical examples of circular arguments include rights claims. Let's go for that one. No religion. I have a right to say what I want, therefore you shouldn't try to silence me. Women have a right to choose whether to have an abortion or not, therefore abortion should be allowed. The unborn has a right to life, therefore abortion is immoral. So these are kind of circular.
Right. Yeah, because you've included in the premise the argument that you're making.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And that's begging the question. Circular reasoning. Very good. Complex question fallacy.
Not heard of that one.
Is that dismissing it because it's too complicated?
Yeah, it's the complex question fallacy is committed when a question is asked that rests on a questionable assumption and B, to which all answers appear to endorse that assumption. Some examples. Have you stopped beating your wife?
Right, and then, so it automatically, there's the assumption that you started beating your wife in the first place.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
So here's another one, which I particularly
It's not a
like.
yes/no question, is it?
No, this one's very good. Are you going to admit that you are wrong? Answering yes to this question is an admission of guilt. Answering no to the question implies that the accused accepts that he is in the wrong, but will not admit it.
You're wrong regardless. It's just whether you're accepting it or not. Sort of. There's no secret option for you to be right.
So I think that's a really good example. Are you going to admit that you're wrong? Because I think definitely heard this. I may have used it myself. If I have, I need a good kick in.
Yeah, we'll need to draft up a short list of the most perfect, succinct examples.
Yes, that's right. And then put it out there.
Because those are the ones that literally just perfectly encapsulate it.
Sure. So where are we? We're on to cum hoc fallacy.
It sounds terrible, but I don't actually know what it is.
Yeah,
is that
not a clue. Doesn't sound pleasant.
It's when it's when two things occur at the same time that they are causally related.
Right.
So the simultaneity of it means that it's causally linked. And again, that comes down to the null hypothesis.
Right. It sounds a little like a confusion between correlation and causation. Like,
yeah.
Kind of, yeah. The correlation being well,
I'll give you.
kind
I
of,
mean,
right?
I know
Because it's not one caused the other. It's just that it's more like correlation. It's a weird one, actually.
This is classic in the stock market because things occur. Markets is gambling, goes up and down, buying and selling, and yet they try to link it often to real world events. So sometimes something will happen. A friend of mine sadly passed away. He was very senior in his company, and he used to monitor the stock because he said it's farcical the way it goes up and down, and it's not. But they try to relate it to an incident that's occurred. They're not correlated, but they still do it anyway. And he said the same instant will occur, and the prices will go up, and the same instant will occur, and the prices will go down, but they will only relate it, when it's positive. And they'll do this constantly. So
we're slipping into Manny's field here a little, aren't we?
Yeah, get Manny on, Manny the trader. So it's connected to post hoc fallacy, which
right.
is
after the event. Post hoc fallacy.
Yeah, this is it's jumped somewhere really crazy now.
If you ever knew there were so many.
No.
We're nearly at the end, guys. I know there's not many people viewing, but maybe we'll get some viewers later. So this is what it's jumped to a completely different link. So I think this post hoc fallacy link is in fact broken. I'm just going to see if I can find. Here we go.
Yeah, look, Pete's Peters to it. He's similar to post hoc ergo propter.
It is exactly what Pete said. After this, therefore, because
knows what he's talking about.
After this, therefore, because of this. So if something occurs post hoc, it's believed to be correlated to in other words, the thing is believed to be a causation.
Yeah.
Without any evidence. Right. And I think we definitely see that. Some examples here. Most people who read the last rites die shortly afterwards. Therefore, priests are going around killing people with magic words.
That's awesome.
Most people who read the last, I read that badly. Sorry. Most people who read the last rites die shortly afterwards. Therefore, priests are going around killing people with magic words.
That's amazing.
That is, it's interesting. We're going to do this, by the way. If anyone wants to join us on the Discord server, we should do this. We should have a couple of debates and see if we can not fall foul. I don't know if any of us are fast enough though to pick up on them. But we need 3 or 4 referees, right?
That's what I was going to say. You need multiple people listening out just to fill in the gaps.
So we've got false dilemma, bifurcation fallacy. Do we have that on any of our sheets?
No, I'm not familiar again.
So the bifurcation fallacy is committed when a false dilemma is presented, i.e. when someone is asked to choose between 2 options when there is at least one other option available.
Oh, I would have called this something more like a false dichotomy.
Yes. Yes, that's good. That's a really good turn of phrase. So the examples are, they're all religious. I do apologise to religious folks. Either a creator brought the universe into existence or the universe came into existence out of nothing.
Yeah. This is a common straw man that I've faced.
The universe didn't come into existence out of nothing because nothing comes from nothing. Therefore, a creator brought the universe into existence.
Yeah. These are not the only 2 options on the table, people.
No. And in fact, scientists don't know. And it's quite possible that the universe was always in existence.
Yeah, it could be eternal.
People
could
do
be
not like that, but infinity.
Yeah, the short
answer
is I don't know. Yeah. Infinite regression.
Infinite regression. Yeah.
I don't have too much of a problem with it. I think it's quite a neat solution.
Turtles all the way down.
Yeah, why not?
And actually, I think we might have solved the free will problem, Ross, with the many multiverse. The many worlds.
Oh no, not that bloody.
I know, I'm not going to go there. Not yet. I'm not going there. I promise I won't go there. Hasty generalization fallacy.
Hasty generalization
Who's
fallacy.
naming these bloody fallacies?
This is actually on logicalfallacies.info, so it's actually got a domain
Oh,
name
wow.
just about this, which is quite good. A hasty generalization draws a general rule from a single, perhaps atypical case. It is the reverse of sweeping generalization.
Right, so is this along the lines of an anecdotal evidence?
Yeah, my Christian atheist neighbour is a real grouch, therefore Christian/atheists are grouches.
Yeah, or
That kind
my
of thing.
friend was sexually assaulted, therefore we live in a rape culture. Or
Yeah. Yep. Gonna get struck off for that last comment, Ross.
sorry,
Yeah, demonetized.
Demonetized. He mentioned it. Okay,
I'm not
this is
saying
different.
it's not true. I'm just.
Ross will give the best definition on it. So we are on to the no true Scotsman fallacy. I think we did mention it earlier, but if you want to explain it again.
Yeah. No true Scotsman has sugar on his porridge. Therefore, if you put sugar on your porridge, you're not a Scotsman.
Mm-hmm.
And it's we see it all the time. We see it with
It's religion.
yeah.
Let's be honest, it is.
Sorry, guys. Yeah, you're not these people who are committing atrocious acts of violence are not true Muslims. Well,
Yeah.
Whilst I agree that they might not be following the doctrine of the majority of Muslims, it doesn't necessarily mean that we have the right to tell them they're not Muslims.
It's just convenient, right, to disregard every practitioner of your faith or whatever who happens to do something negative.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't.
Yeah.
This thing's closer to home. We don't have to talk about religion. We can talk about politics or politicians.
Yeah.
Or,
well, yeah. I mean, if everyone deploys this, then it literally becomes redundant, right? Because then no single belief system is responsible for anything.
Yeah, you just trim it to fit, don't you? Oh no, that wasn't us. That was an outlier. That was.
Yeah. But then, like I said, if everyone does that, then you just end up completely disregarding the influence of ideology upon an individual's act. Whereas obviously we do know that there is some degree of influence.
Dennis has just posted a
Cheeky.
Akuma and Peaceful talking on Discord. I almost have fallacy bingo listening to them. They're our religious brothers there getting some abuse. I'm sure we can play. I think, in fact, our first target will be atheists. We'll do some ripping into atheists for their logical fallacies just to balance it out a bit.
Well, even this conversation has led me to the conclusion that I'm quite fond of 2 or 3 of these.
Yeah,
what we should do
for sure
is maybe when we're in Discord chats, keep like a secret tally and
a
then
score sheet.
Yeah, and then like at the end of the week or something, be like, oh yeah, you came up with 100 fallacies.
It's important to know, though. It's really important to know that the fallacist fallacy does still apply, right? So just because we commit a fallacy or anybody commits a fallacy does not mean that the argument is false. It's important to stress that point.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, it would just be as a means of trying to reduce the amount of fallacies someone makes during the course of them making their argument, but it wouldn't be actually disregarding.
I mean, obviously, if all their premises
or the conclusion,
if they're all fallacies, then we've got a problem.
Well, it still doesn't mean that their conclusion is wrong. To be fair,
no, it doesn't.
But just means that they're really bad at arguing.
If the premises are false, or some of them are false, then it doesn't tell us anything about the conclusion. However, if all the premises are true, then the conclusion is true. If the statement is valid in the first place, right? That's the important point of the statement. But we'll explore this more. Like, we maybe even have a debate where we test this out on a live stream and see if we can keep score afterwards.
I feel like you both probably have both participants just tripping over themselves, trying to like stop themselves from making the fallacy.
Well, I think it should be us 3 that do it, so we can abuse ourselves. But I'm convinced that we'll get the red card within about 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Oh, let's. I'm gonna have to go really slow. Put it that way. Let's have a really
make
slow
Pete the
argument.
referee, and we'll barely get on the pitch before we're sent
I
off.
was going to say, if Pete's the referee, we've had it, haven't we? He's a sharpshooter, that guy.
Not a Texas sharpshooter.
No,
No.
not a Texas sharpshooter, which is not a fallacy, right? But it's a flaw in argument, in argument, but it's not. I nearly said argumentation then. God, stop me. It's
Is it not a fallacy? Is Texas sharpshooter not a fallacy?
It's on my list of fallacies.
Oh, well,
but,
perhaps there's one missing then, or maybe it's one of the others. We'll press on anyway, and then we're nearly at
Yeah.
we're nearly at the end. So we've got we've done the post hoc, so we've got slippery slope, which we've done. We've got sweeping generalization fallacy.
Right.
I think we know what that is.
Yeah.
I don't think we need to.
I think
we're all
I think
guilty of that
atheists
one.
are more guilty of that one. Often guilty of that one up the corner. Make sweeping generalizations about religious people a lot of the time. I think we have probably done so in this live stream.
Yeah, children should not be heard. Children should be seen and not heard. Little Wolfgang Amadeus is a child, therefore little Wolfgang Amadeus shouldn't be heard. Well, that's interesting.
Yeah. But see, this is a weird one though, right? Because I feel like you can generalize the group without having to demonize the individual. Like, you can draw a consensus about the group without. Yeah, I don't know. Does anyone else agree? Like, if I'm speaking to a Muslim, I don't assume that he is like pro jihad or something like that, or I don't assume that he wants to throw gay people off of rooftops or anything like that just because
No, and if
a
you
number of
did,
other Muslims also do.
if you did, then you would be making a sweeping generalization.
Yeah.
No, but yeah, I know, but like you could make, let's say that I don't know, 51% of Muslims want homosexuality to be illegal.
Sure.
Right. So like, well, then is it unreasonable then if you are talking about Muslims as a collective to generalize them as against homosexuality? I don't know if that is.
Well, I'd say
No,
51%.
Majority held position.
But that would be like
then,
saying the majority. That'd be like saying English people want Brexit or British people want Brexit.
Well, if you said the majority of English people want Brexit or the majority of Muslims are anti-homosexuality, then I don't think you would be committing the fallacy.
I'll be honest with you, on 51%, I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say the majority either, even though it is true. I wouldn't use that phrase, the majority.
No.
Well, I
Not
mean, you
when
could
it's
use
so
anything. Like,
close.
you could say like significant minority or like something like that.
Yeah.
I think this is something that someone like Tommy Robinson is guilty of, and it's lack of precision with language. Like you've said, Sym, I don't think it's unreasonable to make a generalization about a group of people, but I think you need to be clear that you are making a generalization that is not true of all the individuals. But I'm not saying Tommy does it a lot, but there are certain interviews where he says things like Muslims this, or Muslims believe this, or Muslims want this, and I think that's maybe erring on the side of a sweeping statement that should be avoided.
Well, yeah, I guess because that sounds more like talking in absolutes, right? Even if necessarily that's not what he intends to do, that it could definitely be interpreted as 100% of insert group here do this.
Yeah, I think it's just being careful about the way you word things.
Yeah, I mean he does. Yeah, I mean he's been called on this a few times, hasn't he, Robinson?
Yeah, of course.
To be fair, he does a pretty good job of trying to retract the generalization.
Yeah.
Well, his thing isn't his thing as like a means of safety, as he tries to attack the book rather than the individuals. At least that's what I hear, that he goes after Islam rather than Muslims, which I guess is a sort of, again, way of avoiding that kind of problem. Like, you're not generalizing a community if you can literally just pick apart the book, right? I mean, that's just you're simply picking apart the book.
Yeah. But there's a lot of general. I mean, I think when people attack religious folks, I think there's a lot of generalizing goes on. I think that's why Ross said, "Oh, the atheists are going to be guilty of this." Um,
Oh yeah, for sure. I'm super guilty.
I think we're all guilty. And Manny's saying the same.
I'll be catching a life sentence for this. That's how much I do it.
No, I agree. I think it would be interesting. Tommy's an interesting case, Tommy Robinson, because at the end of the day, he's not necessarily setting out to make truth claims. He's trying to get a point across.
Yeah.
And he's not thinking, and he's not the best person to think about what's being said. He's trying to draw our attention to a problem as he sees it. So I think it's a little bit different. He's not exactly arguing, and I think that's probably what Manny is getting at there, and I think that's right. But he's an interesting case, but we'd have to do the counter argument as well. We'd have to look at the counter narratives and see if they also are committing logical fallacies, and I think they almost certainly are. So we are at the last two now. We've got subjectivist fallacy. I do not know what that is at all. So there are two types of claim, objective and subjective. Objective claims have the same truth value for everyone. For example, the claim that the Earth is cuboid is an objective claim. It's either true for everyone or false for everyone. It isn't possible for the Earth to be cubed for me and spherical for you, but flat for everyone else, because whatever shape the Earth is, it is the only shape.
Yeah. I think this is quite a large subject. This one. I mean, people seem to struggle with the difference between objective and subjective.
And we're going to do a whole show on that, because me and Tim want to have a conversation about.
Yeah, don't test me, man.
Relativist morality. I'm going to test you. I might fail, but I'm going to test you. But no, I think you're right. I mean, we tried to do it in Discord a couple of times, talk about objective versus subjective. To me, it's very straightforward. It's subjective is in the mind, and objective is external to the mind. Obviously, the devil's in the detail a bit there, but we don't need to go into detail here. But let's see if we can come up with some examples. They look a bit complex, the examples, I have to say. Okay, so it's something like your argument concludes that P is true. Many people don't accept that P is true, therefore your argument fails. So in other words, what they're saying is there is a subjective view. It's a little like a reverse of a sort of populist sort of view, isn't it?
Is it like disregarding it because it is subjective? Like, is that what's
more or
being
less?
said?
Yeah, they're saying that's right. So many people believe the Earth is flat. So an argument, that the Earth is, was it an oblate spheroid? Is that what they call it?
Something like that, yeah. Oblate sphere, I think, yeah.
So it's basically appealing to the subjective nature of belief. But of course, when people argue that the Earth is flat, they are actually arguing that the Earth is objectively flat, right? That we all will experience a flat Earth. They're not arguing that they personally believe it's flat. That's the distinction. So
I'm trying not to react.
Oh, go on. Do you want to argue about the flat Earth? You're going to jump in?
No.
I cannot pronounce this word.
Type it in the chat, or you're doing the stream actually, ain't you?
No, I'll type it in the chat.
You can.
Who wants to have a crack at pronouncing that?
Oh, Tuquoquie.
Is that what it is, Tuquoquie?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, that is it. Who wants to tell us what it is?
Yeah, I can do that.
Go for it.
I don't even see where you've typed it.
I put it in the.
Or have you put it into YouTube?
Yeah, YouTube.
Oh, all right. Yeah, I'm speaking through the Discord, so
I'll put it in the Discord for you. There you go. In the Discord.
Yeah, Tuquoquie is basically, say I've got an incredibly unhealthy diet, and I tell you that you should eat 5 vegetables a day, or 5 lots. You should eat your 5 a day, and you turn to me and say, "I'll do it when you do it." So it's basically dismissing someone's views because they don't live up to those standards themselves.
Right.
Oh, so it's like an hypocrisy fallacy.
Yeah.
I guess, yeah, like, so, like, they would disregard and meet, like James, for example, right? Someone would say that you couldn't argue the pro-vegan position because you eat meat or something like that, I guess.
Apparently children
Even
use,
though you could obviously make the argument.
so and so.
Yeah.
This is a slightly different thing here, what they're saying, but yeah, if the argument commits that to quo qui fallacy because it assumes that if someone else does a thing, then it's okay for us to do it too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So children apparently do this all the time, which I think they do. Oh, he did it. Yeah, like,
Yeah.
why are you doing
Right,
that? You know,
yeah,
like,
yeah.
oh yeah, well he did it, so and so did it. I just want to come back to something because Manny's raised a question there. I want to see if we make sure we cover it. So
Oh, is he watching?
Yeah, Manny's listening. Yeah. So it says, so the Earth can be flat and a sphere. Manny's putting that point.
Hell no.
Yeah, so basically what would happen there, Manny, is that the people that are saying that the Earth is an oblate spheroid would have to demonstrate that. They would have to bring their evidence of that and prove it without committing fallacies. And the flat earthers would need to do likewise. And what we're arguing is that the flat earthers would in fact commit some fallacy or state something that was simply untrue, a premise that was untrue, and therefore not be able to derive a true conclusion. The thing about these things is that the nature of these arguments are, as I say, if they're inductive, then they are probabilistic in nature.
Yeah.
Not absolute truth. Although I find flat Earth being a chance of it. You know, the chance that flat Earth is possible seems quite ludicrous. But
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of numbers after the decimal point as to how sure the world isn't flat.
Yeah, but there's actually a mathematical proof, which I should post in one, that 99.9% recurring equals 1.
Oh, I've heard that, yeah.
Yeah,
Like,
so
yeah,
it's
I've heard something basically like that, yeah.
There is actually a mathematical fallacy, which we haven't talked about because they're more to do with formal fallacies. These are informal fallacies, and that basically where you create a mathematical proof that's flawed in order to demonstrate something, and you cheat. But it's beyond the scope of this, what we're talking about, but maybe another time. So did we miss any?
We're called Globers, I think, Manny.
Globers.
I mean, I guess there is technically the sharpshooter one. I don't know. Or did we mention that by a different name?
Not sure.
Texas sharpshooter.
Yeah, tell us about the Texas sharpshooter if anyone wants to do it.
I mean, it's just the cherry picking of data, right, to suit your argument. Like, if you've already got a conclusion in mind, you're basically, well, cherry picking exactly, looking for data that specifically lends credit to your conclusion, whilst disregarding other data that sort of might argue contrary to whatever you're saying.
I thought it was the literal Texas sharpshooter fallacy is where you shoot the side of a barn and then draw the target on afterwards. So for me, I see this most commonly in things like prophecy, where, I don't know, say I have a particular passage that says when the sky grows dark and blood is spilt, and then there's an eclipse and a war going on at the same time, and I fit that passage to those particular events. I knew what the events were, so I've shaped the words to fit it. Whereas it could equally mean dusk or dawn, and it could equally mean sacrificing of an animal rather than a war. Like,
right. So you're almost more like manipulating the data, I guess, kind of.
Yeah, I think the place where I see it most commonly is in prophecy, where you have lots of different possible explanations for a particular passage, and you fit it to something convenient that happens to fit those, that loosely fit the passage itself. I don't know. It's difficult to explain. I'm trying to think of a specific example.
Yeah, I mean, I've got an example here, but again, I think it goes it's more along the lines of just what I said with the whole cherry picking thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we're definitely going to have to get some bods on to test us. I think we have to use Pete to.
Yeah. Someone needs to disagree with us.
We've already accepted that we're all screwed.
Yeah, we're all screwed. None of us are good at arguing.
No.
I have to say that I don't know if it's because I am one, but atheists annoy me the most. You know, at the corner, they're the ones that really annoy me. And I guess because maybe it's because I feel that they are arrogant about their arguments. I mean, the same could be true of said of religious people. I don't get the arrogance vibe as much as I get it from atheists. But I might be seriously biased there.
Well, I guess it's quite easy to look. It's quite easy to look down upon the religious religious belief. So just by virtue of being an atheist alone, a lot of people are already going to take this sort of "I'm above you" kind of position.
Yeah, with the support of the scientific community, I think many atheists tend to be quite arrogant and dismissive, myself included.
Yeah, I mean, to an atheist, religion this is being blunt. To a lot of atheists, religion sounds stupid.
Yeah,
and so you see a practitioner of religion, and you assume them to be stupid because they practice the faith.
Yeah. I think that's true. Not intentional, but true.
A lot of atheists, and me and Ross have talked about this many times, but a lot of atheists were once religious, and I feel, I believe that that they feel that they've lost something in their life, that they feel stupid in some way for believing it at some point in their life, and they feel the need to address the balance, by going overboard. I mean, I've never been religious,
angry.
so yeah, they're angry about their past. Like Matt Dillahunty, who's a name that comes up a lot, used to be a Christian pastor. So there's a great example there, and there are many examples of people that were once Jewish or Muslim or Christian that have since turned to atheism, and they've got a real chip on their shoulder about it. Not all, but some.
No.
I sense it, and the thing that I hate most is when they are having an argument and their vitriol, their aggression is directed at the person of the argument, and we're all guilty of this for sure. Me most certainly, but that shows something. It's not that you want to destroy the argument; you're trying to actually hurt the person.
Yeah.
And I feel that
belittle them or humiliate them,
and that feels common for atheists. I maybe I'm biased, but I really feel that we are worse at that than our religious counterparts.
Yeah, I mean, I've experienced it in reverse. I've been laughed at for saying something that seems to me quite rational. But yeah, I do tend to agree with you. We see it a lot in the atheistic community.
Yeah, me and Manny have spoke about like narcissism being an issue as well.
Trying to prove that the religious people are just being silly.
Well, look, it is. I'm going to say something I'm not going to say that because that's not nice. But there's a lot of. If you think about it, there's a lot of. It's a lot easier to win the atheist argument because it's not based on faith. At least unless you go down that sort of skepticism, extreme skepticism route. And maybe it lends itself to narcissism, that they can come in and argue against religious people or spiritual people to get their kicks, and I think that's what's going on.
I mean, I think the park as a whole lends itself to narcissism, right? Like on both sides. Because it's all point scoring to elevate yourself.
Right, but I have a lot of, if you are a religious person and you really believe it, then you want other people to be saved, that's admirable. But if your intention is just to go there to make someone look stupid, which is what a lot of atheists do, then that is not admirable.
I guess I just don't get the impression that a lot of religious people are going, especially to the park, deliver salvation. Like,
you think
that's just
you
not the
think there's an
impression I
arrogance
get, at
there. I
least.
mean, look, there are clearly characters that are guilty of what you're saying.
I think a lot of it is motivated by the positions they're against rather than the positions they're in favor of. I think they go there. I think most people go there to shit on their opponents
Yeah.
than to sort of like share the great things about their own position.
I mean, we've said it several times that the best conversations at Speaker's Corner often happen in sort of the quiet corners where you're having a nice conversation, a pleasant chat, rather than a heated debate. I think you learn a lot more when you're not trying to win.
But that's what I was going to say. Yeah, if no one's watching, then then you don't care whether you win or lose, because like there's no benefit nor negative. It's just not a competition at that point, right? It literally ceases to be a debate and it just becomes a discussion.
Yeah.
There's nothing on the line, really.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with an audience, but it's the nature of the conversation that's important to me.
Yeah.
The problem is it's a vicious spiral, right? So you go there, you're made to look stupid. You desperately want to then come back and attack the person who made you look stupid. And you have to stop and say, hold on a second. What is going on here? Maybe I am stupid. Maybe I was wrong there. It's really difficult to do that, and we're all guilty of not being able to do it.
Yeah.
And you get caught up in these live streams as well. Not this particular live stream, but other live streams where it gets heated, and you just end up on this spiral. But yeah, I mean, and funny thing is, this feeds into all the fallacies, right? So people have all these beefs, and then they end up committing logical fallacies because they're desperately trying to, win the argument.
Yeah, it's not idea A versus idea B. It's person A versus person B.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we get that in politics. We get that in religious discussions. We get that in all sorts of debate and formal argument.
Oh, for sure. I mean,
celebrity status.
Well, yeah, people care more about they themselves winning than like their, I don't know, philosophy winning or something like that. There's a lot of self-interest.
But I mean, you've got to ask yourself the question, sorry, I'm pulling it back to the atheism thing again, as I often do. What do atheists hope to achieve? I mean, when they are attacking, I mean, do we really want to convince people that the thing that gives them solace is wrong? Is that a good thing?
See, well, this is the whole thing. Like, is it okay to would you leave someone to their delusion if their delusion delivers them a higher quality of life, or should you remove them from that delusion?
I've used this example a few times, but David Wood, I am perfectly happy for him to be a Christian. I think it gives his life structure and order. And prior to being a Christian, he was a nihilist who effectively attempted to murder his own father. He suffers with psychopathy. So I think in his case, there's certainly I wouldn't want to discourage his belief. I think it's beneficial to him. I wouldn't want to change that.
I mean, there's a big difference between not allowing children to be indoctrinated, for example, because I bang on about this all often. There's a big difference in not knowing something, although I think I'm wrong in many regards. I think I'm going to disprove myself here. And taking someone who has a belief and taking it away from them. So
yeah, I don't. Yeah, I'm kind of against you on that, to be honest with you. Like,
go on, go.
Because I mean, that just sounds like, because then the question becomes: is it okay to deny someone something that would bring them solace? Like,
I'm saying I think my argument about the denial of the indoctrination is weak for the reasons I just gave. I'm basically agreeing with you, I think. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, basically, yeah. That like, yeah, the two positions, yeah, don't seem necessarily like you could defend both.
I suppose it's the argument of whether or not false hope is better than no hope.
I mean, I guess there's probably some sort of arbitrary line that we'll all end up drawing, really, because like you said about David Wood, like even if I were to agree with you on that, right? Like, how much of the population is religious? Like, we've got to be talking.
Yeah, I mean,
more
he's
than
a,
half of the world,
50%,
right? Yeah.
yeah, at least 50% of the world, right? And like, we can appreciate that 50% of the world isn't reliant
psychopathic.
upon
Yeah.
this, yeah, to stop them from killing their parents or whatever. So,
although I'm sure you've both been asked, why don't you go around raping and murdering?
well, yeah, that's
Many times. Many
where
times.
do you get your
people-
morality from? If
Yeah.
not from God.
Anyway, we're
Yeah,
drifting somewhat.
Yeah, we're drifting. I think we've pretty much come to the end of it. I'm sorry, Sym, I didn't put you in the write-up, so I'll change that as soon as I can.
In the title.
In the title, I'll change that.
That's okay. I mean, it's not like I'm bringing viewers in or anything like that. You don't
Dude,
have to.
it's all good. And you have to, from little acorns grow.
Yeah, totally.
Speak for yourself.
Little acorns.
From little acorns
Exactly.
grow, yeah. So
Did we miss any? Did we miss any?
do you want to just quickly look at your picture, Sym?
Yeah, I'll double check.
I think we got most of them, but
Did
I'm sorry, I
talk
just
about...
went for one site because I realised I didn't have a definitive list in my head anyway.
Yeah, I'll just brush through any that I see really, really quickly. It says there's one here, middle ground, which is basically that you just take obviously the middle ground between two extremes and you establish that as truth without sufficient evidence for it.
Right. Yeah.
Let's see. I don't know.
Yeah,
that
you
there's
centrist, you.
Did we? I don't even know if it's a formal or an informal fallacy, but the black swan fallacy.
That's a type of fallacy, isn't it? Or maybe I'm wrong. Well, no, say it, Ross. Go and explain it. I know what it is, but you tell it.
I'm not sure I'm going to do it justice, but basically the fallacy is claiming that there are no black swans, and that was essentially true up until we discovered Australia and found black swans. So
the black swans at Leeds Castle, if you want to go and see them.
Oh, so I guess coming back to the atheism thing again, that for me that's more of a hard atheist position, claiming that there is no God. Well, there is no God right up until the point where we discover a God. I don't think sweeping statements about truth based on absence of evidence are logical. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, what science would say is that this is our best explanation so far, right? So we just because something is true today does not mean it's true tomorrow.
Yeah.
So we can hold to the view that this is our best explanation. So swans are white until such time as we find green ones or black ones or whatever.
Yeah.
Sort of makes sense. Whereas the sort of a more religious position would be more absolute, that this is this is it, and therefore when things change, it's susceptible to ridicule. Whereas science is basically saying whatever we find, we are forced to change, our opinion.
Yeah.
So sorry, Sym,
you
were going down the list.
Well, just because we did the appeal to nature. That the fact that we can observe something within nature, it doesn't follow that that's a moral action. And then the last one, I think, special. It says moving the goalposts.
Oh, moving the goalposts.
Yeah.
God, I hate that one. That happens to me always.
So the example here it gives is someone who claims to be psychic, but then when they're proven that they can't, obviously, I don't know, use their psychic ability, they'll make some sort of excuse up, like it only works if you have faith in it and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Only works on women, or it only works on 50%.
Yeah, you wouldn't understand because you're a non-believer or some shit like that, I guess.
But this revelation
that's an
only...
ad hominem in there as well, isn't it? All wrapped up.
Yeah.
But this revelation only comes to the forefront after the test has been failed. So it's like ad hoc reasoning or
Yeah, it's like scrambling to make up an excuse, basically.
Yeah.
Whereas you never would have made that assertion. Well, actually, some people might actually make that assertion beforehand as sort of a safety net sort of thing, but it's still a disingenuous thing to do.
Yeah.
I should add, really, actually, that these fallacies do in no way disprove religion.
No, not at all.
This is not what they're there for. This is about showing weaknesses in arguments. This is not about disproving. This is not about saying atheism is dominant in any way, because at the end of the day, the religious paradigm is significantly different from the science paradigm.
Yeah.
And we all have to make assumptions. And faith is something that one can't argue against. So we can argue against truth claims.
Yeah, I mean, to defend my position a little, I would say that faith is not a good method for finding truth, because you could take anything on faith. You could choose any religion and take that to be true on faith, or you could believe in aliens or unicorns or fairies or anything you like, and so long as you're taking it on faith, it I don't know, it just doesn't feel like a truth claim in any way. I don't think it's self-supporting.
Yeah, definitely. I think we should all be wary of these fallacies, though. And watching videos, and you've got the opportunity to stop them, pause them, think about it. And I think we could all be better in our reasoning and the political reasoning. Not just forget religion, but politics is more where I'm scared, where people are listening to popularists telling lies about this and that and the other, and we're all believing it. And it doesn't matter which side of the Brexit debate you're on, for example. Lies were told on both sides.
Yeah, totally.
And we are all guilty of believing the lies that suit our argument. And that's the thing about fallacies. Logical fallacies they slip through the net because we don't want to think that we're wrong.
Yeah, and just stepping back to the religion very briefly, even if we were right and that there is no God, it doesn't mean that religion has no value, and it doesn't mean that it doesn't have historical relevance. It doesn't mean that there aren't good moral lessons to be learned, although I dispute that all of the lessons are moral. But it doesn't mean that there isn't wisdom held within the pages. Like I don't think any of us three are completely dismissive of religion in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots. I mean, there's a chap that goes to Speaker's Corner that I believe is a doctor. He usually rocks up in the morning. I've seen him only a couple of times, but he argues that, and I think it's not his argument. He's taken it from somewhere else. That once you get more than about 150 people together as a tribe, you need religion is the glue. You can't keep stuff together without some kind of faith, and that doesn't have to be religious faith. It can be some sort of ideological view. But that it is necessary. Does anyone know anything about this, like Ross, Sym?
I remember that it was us. I want to say this guy who was talking about this was maybe on like a Joe Rogan podcast, but I can't remember who. But I do remember the maximum size of the tribe being 150 before stuff starts getting.
I'll have to look into it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Leon saying Dr. Jack. Yeah, it could be, mate. I'm not sure. Very nice guy. Well-spoken chap. And he puts this point across that religion is necessary. I certainly argue that religion is innate, that we need to invent it to fill in the gaps. We crave meaning. Religion gives us meaning. It's the only thing that does give us meaning, and it fills in the gaps. But the question of whether it is essential, the jury's out for me. I don't know about you guys. Do you have a view on that? I don't know, is the answer.
Nah, bin it.
Yeah, I mean, it's
I'm
a
only
hard
kidding.
one, right? Like,
yeah, it's part of the fabric of society, so I'm not going to dismiss it out of hand.
In fact, I would say I'll probably fall on the side of religion, even though I'm the most extreme. I have the most extremist view. about the child indoctrination. Contradictory as it may be, I do feel that religion could well be essential.
I mean, ultimately,
I'd like to
the problem
find
is
out.
we don't have what we need, but ideally, we would have every stat basically on hand to do a cost-benefit analysis. But without that, I mean, it's hard to say whether it's more beneficial than detrimental.
I mean, some people use the sort of I don't think they're good examples. I think they are one of the fallacies, but I'll say it anyway. The communist attempts to
Knew
eradicate
you were
religion.
going there. I knew you were going there.
I don't think it's a good argument, but I think it's worth considering that under Stalin, under Mao, they tried to eradicate religion, but obviously they were also imposing a authoritarian, totalitarian, despicable regime on
Almost
people.
dogmatic
I was going
regime.
to say, you could basically argue that you could almost argue that they had their own religion, but it was like secular in nature.
Yeah. But there's so many other issues, the famines, all the other awful things, the gulags, whatever else was going on. It's impossible to separate them and say, oh well, that was religion that caused that.
Or that was atheism in that case.
Sorry, that was atheism. Yes, yeah.
But you could do exactly the same thing with religion.
Yes.
People like to blame a religion as being the cause of things when it may well be a contributing factor, but it also may not be the cause. It might be correlation rather than cause.
And of course, there's religion and there's religion, right? So, Speaker's Corner is not representative of religious folks. Most religious folks have, very, I don't know, sort of simple views. They'd go about their everyday life as we all do, and yet they hold to these beliefs, and they don't, they're quite separate, and they're not so hard and fast and dogmatic as maybe people at Speakers would have you believe.
No, all of us to go to Speakers were a little bit bonkers.
Yeah, I hold to the view that everyone at Speakers is bonkers, in some way, shape. We're on a spectrum of bonkersness.
I think I don't go.
Yeah, you're okay, Sim. You don't go. Well, you did go once, so you've got a little tiny bit of bonkers in you.
Yeah.
I think you're allowed to visit, but I think it's the recurring visits. I'll exclude Leon because he goes to film, so maybe that's okay.
Yeah.
He's excluded. He's just out.
He's studying us nutters.
He's studying us nutters, so maybe he's the doctor, Dr. Leon. But I think the rest, as for the rest of us, we've got a screw loose. There's no question. In my mind, anyway, that there's something up there.
Yeah, I guess people need to just ask themselves as individuals, what are they getting out of going? Like, what is the actual motive behind going?
Yeah, I mean, some people there are definitely there for a cause and definitely there with an agenda in mind. But if you're a regular who's just going along for the debate, for the discussion, then I don't know.
But even then, like, you find people going, but they would tell you that they're not getting any smarter as a result. Like, they're not necessarily the person taking part every week, like, for the sake of scoring brownie points either. So there is some sort of weird thing where, like, well, why are you going then?
Yeah. I'm not sure I could justify why I go. I do. I enjoy it. I like the open, honest conversation that you get at Speaker's Corner. Like, certainly politics, religion, philosophy, these things are almost sort of social faux pas in day-to-day life. You don't speak to your work colleagues about religion because you don't want to cause offense to anybody, or you don't talk about politics because you might rub your boss up the wrong way. Or
I go for I've said this so many times, but and it sounds cheesy, but I just like the meet and greets. I just like it's
the networking.
The networking. I'm not. I mean, Manny knows we have done a bit of networking there as well. A bit of business has been taking place as well. But no, it is the meeting people, and them having radically different views as well that I find really pleasant. the shaking hands, the fist bumping, the all
Yeah,
that
you
stuff.
can end up in a little bit of a what do they call it, an echo chamber in day-to-day life, whereas Speaker's Corner, there's some diverse beliefs at Speaker's Corner.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could say that Speaker's Corner kind of acts as the catalyst, like the initial meeting point from which better stuff comes about, right? Like you said, meeting new people, maybe having smaller circles of people who you can actually have genuine good conversations with, as opposed to sort of the masses who tend to attend every week, that sort of stuff.
Have we drifted far enough away from logical arguments?
I think we're
just rambling because we've finished all of them now.
Well, I'm enjoying the conversation, but I'm not sure we're on topic anymore.
No, I think we're almost done.
Not.
I'm just typing.
I'll say, how long have we been going for? About
a couple of hours, two and a half. Yeah. I think we're done until the next topic. We finally did get another live stream out. Have a bit of a hiccup, bit lazy, but we're going to try and make this more regular. But I'd like to do some more. I'd like to do some analysis of some of the Speaker's Corner stuff.
Yeah, lovely.
And also other people as well, like the Jordan Petersons, the Sam Harrises, because these guys are not infallible as people might expect, and they do make mistakes. And there are some divisive characters that we could look at, the Lawrence Southerns, the Rebel Media characters, whatever.
Yeah.
And I think we could, but not make it personal. And not partisan. I don't want to be going, oh, look at what the Muslims are doing, or look at what gang are doing, or look at what the Christians are doing. So I think what we'll do is we'll start off with our lot, and we'll attack them first. We'll start off with the atheists, and we'll show that they are full of hypocrisy and committing fallacies,
arrogance, and
yeah. So Pete's saying cognitive biases. Yeah, too right. That's me, mate. Full of bias. Anyway, I think, is any of you guys want to say anything? Ross, Sim?
No, I'm good. It's been pleasurable.
Yeah, I was going to say, hope everyone enjoyed the show. Have a pleasant night. Yep. Don't drink and drive.
It's Christmas, isn't it? It's the season.
It's the season, yeah. Don't worry about the fallacies. Worry about the driving.
Yeah, be safe, everyone.
Don't eat too much over Christmas.
Special thanks to Ross and Sim for joining. That was really good of you guys to come on, and we'll have you on again and make this a more regular thing if we can.
Definitely got a lot of ideas for show.
Yeah, I know you have. That's why I'm trying to twist your arm, because I know you're the hardest one. So me and Ross will be on all the time, but
I've been AWOL for a few days recently, so good to be back.
Yeah. Okay, thanks everyone, and we'll see you soon. Take care. Good night.